Stephen, thank you so much for being here today.
I'm excited to be with you, my friend, and to see where this conversation goes. So thank you for having me.
So I met Stephen at Miraval Resort in Austin. I went there with a friend maybe a month or a month and a half ago, and I signed up for a session with Stephen, a private session. I left feeling excited, recharged. It was a beautiful experience. And so I asked Stephen to be here today to join us on the podcast. And he accepted, and I'm so excited.
I love
So
talking about this stuff, and I love talking about vocation and calling and why we're here. That's my jam.
So, Stephen, I like to start every interview by
Yeah.
asking guests, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, part of me wishes I had a beautiful romantic answer, but one of the themes in my life is things have been alternative, going against the grain. And so people like me who do work that might be spiritual in nature or alternative healing, we're misfits in some ways.
Hmm.
So for when I was young, a couple of things. One thing, I was a bit lost. I
Hmm.
didn't quite know what I wanted to be, maybe, but I was a dreamer.
Hmm.
And the dreamer in me never went away. So
Hmm.
to all the dreamers out there, don't stop dreaming because you could tell me, hey, we read about somebody who's a business entrepreneur, and I would start to dream about being an entrepreneur. Or then someone was a farmer, and I started to dream about being a farmer. And it was quite strange in a way, but I could change from one thing to the other.
Hmm.
And what was deep in me was I felt a sense of calling, of vision, of visionary. And so that stuck with me. And so
Hmm.
I've always been, I wouldn't say visionary sounds very grand, but in some ways I always had a very deep vision for
Hmm.
life and how to change it, you see. And so
Hmm.
that was an asset, but I didn't realize it at the time because the school report card said Stephen daydreams too much in class. I was the kid looking out the window. So it changed multiple times on different things, but a big message from my early life was the sense of I don't belong.
Hmm.
And even to the point
Interesting.
in my own country, in Scotland, to some degree, like I don't fit in here. And that went to my mid 20s before that really changed. But there's a sense of, I don't know what this is that I'm meant to do. But all I can
Hmm.
tell you is this just doesn't feel quite right.
Hmm.
And that in some ways was a genesis of my story because it led me to search. And so the quest I never gave up on. And that
Hmm.
went right through to late 20s before it finally starts to morph into something. But I just knew like this isn't quite right. My field of where I'm going isn't, I like it and I'm quite good at it, but it doesn't quite fit.
Hmm. And
I don't
what
know about-
field were you in?
Well, eventually I had a relatively decent aptitude with numbers and I became an accountant. And I always joke I was never a very good accountant. That was a bit too soft, but a bit too gentle for some of these things. And so I was growing up in Scotland, and you basically take the best jobs you can, and
Hmm.
they were in the oil and gas industry. So I'm at a Miraval Wellness Resort. I'm a medium. I do all this stuff, but I really started off as an oil and gas accountant who then moved to Houston, Texas. That's how I got to the States. And so I was in that
Ah.
field, and I was happy for a while, but I was sort of like something was missing.
Hmm.
There was this dissatisfaction in life that sort of hung around with me. And eventually that sort of became a time of like, I actually feel called to do something to help others. It was very
Hmm.
vague, but that was where it began.
Hmm. Well, I shared that background before. I started off in public accounting and then I went to be an accountant or
Oh,
in
I
financial
see.
reporting in oil
Yeah.
and gas.
Oh, wow.
Also,
Okay. I know exactly. That's so funny.
I was in Plano, north of the Dallas area here in Texas, so close
Yeah,
to
yeah.
Houston. So I share a
Similar
similar,
background. Yeah, wow. Well, a lot of Scottish people migrate to Houston, Texas because of this, because there's a lot
interesting,
of oil and gas in Scotland. They call themselves the oil capital of Europe. And so it has an
interesting.
international flavor. There's lots of pluses to it, not to knock it. It was just
Yeah,
wasn't for me. But
yeah,
that's where I
of
found
course.
myself gravitating to, which led me to come to the States. That
Mm.
was a major change in my life, was moving to a different country.
Well, tell us, Stephen, how do you think that kind of feeling of misfit or alternative or what kind of you were experiencing as a kid, how does that connect to what you do today? And do you mind sharing what you do today?
Yeah. So a number of things that I do. First of all, I'm a spiritual teacher, or we might call a spiritual guide. And so I help people today who perhaps aren't necessarily religious as such, but might feel spiritually inclined.
Hmm.
And so they're looking for an authentic pathway for their life. They're looking for guidance, teachings and practices, meditation and things like this. I help them formulate their spiritual life. And
Hmm.
so they can keep themselves sort of healthy in that regard. And part of what I do, which is my major gift and contribution, is I'm what's called an intuitive medium.
Hmm.
And so an intuitive medium is if people aren't used to this kind of language, you tend to think of mediums as they bring in those who've passed away. I'm a different kind of medium where I channel spirit guides for life readings. People come in and ask about their life and their situation. So I do the living, not the dead. And I mean that in the most respectful way, but it's the easiest way to explain it. And that's a psychic process. I help people have a guidance system for decisions to make, consequences. They talk about relationships and jobs and day-to-day stuff. And so I read that. So we call it a life reading. That's a big part of what I do. And there's never a dull moment, Lupe, doing that work. It's quite an unusual vocation.
How did you find it? I'm so curious. I'm getting this like really sense of peace as I'm listening to you. I feel this connection to you. And I think that will come across to listeners too. You have this calming voice and presence to you.
Yes.
How did you go from oil and gas accounting to this?
Yeah. This is a funny story in a way. Growing up, I was always sensitive, sometimes too much so for the modern life. I mean, I grew up in the 80s in Scotland, and they weren't always nice to sensitive people. They treated them pretty hard. So I had a lot of anxiety and sensitivity that I'd struggled with in early life. And so one part of it is the curse became the blessing. Do you see? And so when you're 16, 18 years old and you're trying to find yourself and you're sensitive and you're shy and you're quiet, what is it? Like, this feels like this is not helpful for life. And so I began a deep investigation of that. But I don't mean too off the wall, but I started to receive intuitions in my mid-20s, almost like a voice speaking inside and almost prompting me in a way. I didn't want to go the Western route. I went more the Eastern route in that way and began to explore and find myself exploring energy work and Reiki type of work and spiritual healing. There's all kinds of things. And even at the point of meeting monks in temples, people who were speaking, and even gurus who would come. And I was the person who sat at their feet and just couldn't get enough of it. And so this just wouldn't stop, this quest. So the sensitivity led to me studying some energy work and these things. And one day I was doing energy work, which is a bit like praying for someone or faith healing, and you're just quiet. And I was on this man, he was sitting in a chair, and I was just quietly doing my little prayers for him and some nice energy work. And I felt this tightness in my chest. And I just sort of came out of my mouth and said, "Oh, my chest feels really tight." And the man said, "That's me you're picking up. That's not you." And I thought, "What do you mean?" He said, "I've had chest pains for years and you're picking up on it." And so the sensitivity I realized was me picking up on other signals from people. And then I began to do more of this, and I realized everyone wanted to tell me their story and they were looking for guidance. And as they asked me, thoughts would appear. And I began to realize, there's something to this. And so you tinker with it over the years and gradually kind of learn your craft.
How do you learn your craft? I read I think on the website, there's training, but did you go to training? Did you just intuitively?
No, there is training to do this. And there are people who can guide you. If you're a sensitive soul and you have intuition or psychic little things bubble up, there are people, and you can even reach out to me if you want to. I guide people in some of this stuff, but you can hone that skill and learn that muscle. So if you can imagine, to fully answer your question, I'm an accountant in oil and gas in Houston, Texas. And I'm sitting there, and I've always been a little bit of an oddball in some ways, a little bit socially awkward. But I started to get into this stuff. I just started talking about it at work. And so the people was really funny. So after a while, they gave me a nickname at work of Yoda. And so they would come in like, "Hey, Yoda, can you?" And they would ask me an accounting question. And then before you know it, I would like start talking about accounting, and I want to speak about deep things in life. And people would come to my office and say, "What's my aura look like?" And this was like this strange double life. And I would leave work as quickly as I could, and I would go off and I would be going into hospitals and hospice and doing work with people. And so I had this sort of double life for a while. And so it was quite strange because I had a reputation where the people around me would then say, like, "Watch out, give him time and take him to lunch." And before you know it, he's going to talk about this wacky stuff. So it's a strange double life. And even things like eating healthy and being mindful, I was doing that 20 years ago before it was cool or a thing. And now I find myself slightly laughing where I get paid to teach people that stuff. And they used to make fun of me 20 years ago. So it feels like a little bit justice to some degree.
At what point did you know it was time to do this full time?
Yeah, I have to give all credit to my wife. I'm a little bit conservative in some ways of change. I'm a little bit nervous of making change. And we were in Houston 2007-ish time period, and we just got married. And I kept talking about this stuff more and more as the years went on. I started my journey around 2001, 2. And so it'd been 5, 6 years of me talking about it.
Mm.
And finally, my wife's like, let's not talk about it anymore. Let's do something. We moved to Austin, and Austin was really a hub of that kind of forward thinking, alternative healing. It was the music scene. There was all these things going on. And we also felt called to build community around this. So I quit and moved to Austin. And it was my birthday when I quit. And I never forget. And we moved to Austin. And it took us a little while, but we then opened a yoga studio. And that was the big leap. It was like push, 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 and all of a sudden, enough. We're going to do it or not. And so that's when I opened the yoga studio, 2009.
Well, right before we started this conversation, Stephen, and in preparing for it, you said you'd like to talk about kind of the spiritual component of vocation. And I would love to hear your thoughts on the spiritual piece of vocation.
I appreciate you just giving space for that. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it or water it down. This is something very profound, in my opinion. So one of the big things when it comes to vocation is the sense of calling. And people have, I find, an aspiration, first to better themselves, to be healthier, to be nicer, to be kinder. And then they'll often pick up on what am I going to do with my life, which ties into some way to give a gift. So imagine that life is based on reciprocity and love. And imagine then that each one of us has a gift to give. You don't have to be a medium or anything outlandish like that. Some people love to take care of others, to serve, to clean well, to create beauty in gardens. And imagine that this is the gift to give. And then imagine that all of life is interconnected. And what you're picking up in your gift is actually a beacon coming from the collective consciousness. And you perceive it as an intuition. And that's like a seed or a hunch that comes. And that seed says, hey, go on, try this. I just have this idea to go and do this. And when you get that beacon, it's a seed, basically, a seed of aspiration, of potential. And it's saying, hey, go plant me. And when you plant that seed, then there's something to it. There's a life force, there's an energy that allows it to grow, to develop. And I call this sort of voice inside that just hints away as your inner compass. And so the inner compass is pointing you in a direction. And if you can imagine and even just stretch your faith a little bit, there's an intelligence in that. And that intelligence is going to lead you in the right place. It won't be easy necessarily. It could be very hard. It could be grueling. There's no doubt about it, but there's something to it, like you're meant to do it. When I opened the yoga studio, we took an enormous risk, and yoga studios are not great business models for any yoga studio listener owners out there. It's not an easy ride, but I knew in my heart, if I didn't try, I would regret it. And I had to trust that seed to some degree. And we didn't make a whole lot of money. It wasn't really a money thing, but we touched a lot of lives. And that's a big part of why I'm here. To me, it's something very beautiful, and it speaks to spirit. Think of your own intuition as it just gives you a nudge, a hint. So if you catch yourself always speaking about something again and again and again, it's probably that your intuition is just starting to merge. And that's when you realize, hey, there's something here, but it has an intelligence, and life is calling to you in your heart. Your heart's like a beacon, the heart chakra. And that beacon's also saying, it's okay, this is a gift I can give. And so that makes us feel full and alive and radiant. It brings out our light. And you can tell in someone when they find it, because their face lights up, literally. I think that's a good sign you're on the right track.
Yes. When we did our session, I didn't know what to expect. And what came through for me was you're on the right track.
Yes, yes.
And I feel that.
Yeah.
I feel that.
That's the beauty of these kind of guidance, because it's validating something inside. So imagine, folks, that there's two sides to you. There is this side that wants to grow and evolve and blossom into something beautiful. And then there's the subconscious mind. And depending on your past and how things have been, you might have created a program mentally which essentially wants to keep you in a small space. Now, that might be useful at some point of keeping you safe, of survival, especially difficult childhoods. But often it needs to be repatterned, you see? Like the brainwaves can be, this is a very physical brainwave type of thing, or neural pathway. And so imagine now that the subconscious mind might resist the change. It usually does. And so pushing through and finding that, it just helps you validate, it helps you reprogram. And so now you can kind of live in an aligned way whereby you're healthy in yourself and you're following your vocation, your dream. So I'm glad you found it, my friend. It makes me so happy, especially coming from oil and gas finance. I'm very happy for you. No disrespect to oil and gas finance, you guys. If you love it, keep doing it. But the fact that you can pivot from something is extraordinary. And also coming to America, I will say, where I come from, things have changed a little bit now, but especially 20 years ago, it's just much easier here. This country is ripe for reinventing yourself. And to me, that's the beauty of this country. is you can do that, and people celebrate change.
Mm.
So yay.
Yeah. Stephen, earlier too, you mentioned before we started that at Mirrorball, you get to work with really successful people that are visiting the
Yes.
resort, and that you see kind of this theme or pattern of people not being happy or feeling stuck. Do you
Yeah,
mind sharing a little bit about that?
I would. It's something very dear to me personally, is finding our potential and working through that. So it's entirely possible and feasible that the people who need that are gravitating to me. But I've done readings now over 1,000 times, maybe 1,500 to 2,000 readings. It's quite a lot. And
Mm,
I'm astonished by how many people at every level of society seem to be actually searching for their purpose
mm,
and trying to find something where it's not just a case of, okay, I'm building wealth and I'm building a career. They actually want to pivot in, how can I best serve? Or
mm,
how can I do something that really speaks to my passions?
mm,
And there's a huge number of people trying to find it. So when the number one question I get is, I'm not so happy in my job, what is it I'm really meant to do?
mm.
And they're all looking for it. And it's a lot of people, Loopy. The second question is how to fix your love life, but that's the other one that comes, but that's a different podcast. But the first real, the most, I guess, common request around people is they're trying to find their place. They want
Mm,
to start a business, they become a consultant or a coach. They're looking for something with independence and freedom that
mm,
speaks to their passion. And again, they see it. I think for myself, for all the problems we have in the world, if you give people a, hey, for 6 months, you're solid, like don't worry about your bills or whatever else it might be, go follow that dream and trust these instincts. I honestly believe that we could transform our world in a relatively small amount of time. I know that's a bit idealistic and utopian sounding, but there's so many people who are so talented, even at very high levels. And I say high levels financially. So even people who have inherited great wealth, who run family foundations, sometimes they're not happy either. You see, it's all of us are in this boat of like, what really speaks to us?
definitely. And I think there's people listening, nodding, and
Yeah,
they get that. So,
yeah,
what would be your thoughts on for someone listening who's feeling that
yeah.
unhappy?
The first thing really is you're not alone.
Mm,
That's the first thing that I want to say in this regard, is that there's lots out there as well. And what comes to me is there's a Rumi poem. You know Rumi, who's the Persian poet?
mm,
And it's talking about the bird leaving the nest.
mm,
And so it's a moment of the little chick wants to come out of the nest, and the mother just gives it a little nudge. And
mm,
mother is, think of that reference as life or Mother Nature or in this kind of way. And it's when we have the fall that we find our wings. Something like that. Rumi says it better than me. But when you have the fall, you find your wings. And life is inviting us to some degree to be vulnerable.
mm,
And it's inviting us to do it so we can be caught, you see, in the stream. So in that way, when you are in that place, it can feel like it's all walls, but there is something to the sense of, how can I find my wings?
mm,
Now, you might need a wing man or a wing woman to some regard, but how can I find my wings? What is that chance worth taking?
mm,
And when that beacon comes and that call comes, is to trust to some degree. Now, if life is hard and you have 3 kids and bills to pay, it's very difficult of what that parameter might look like. I was very fortunate in that my wife said, go on, do it. And I
mm,
made sacrifices. We downsized to make that work. So I would say the trust and appreciation of that there's something there.
mm,
Even if that means you go to night classes for a year and learn a new craft, but
mhm,
it's like, I'm going to trust this mission. I'm going to learn it with all of the common sense that I possibly can.
mm,
And at some point, it's that moment of let's fly.
mm,
But again and again, we get told by sacred traditions and religions and poets of there is something that catches you. I
mm.
was amazed at Yoga Studio because I was down to the wire, every cent we had and more, and everything was poured into this place for the build out. And I was astonished because I could feel in myself it has an energy of its own, and it was bigger than me. And people came out of the woodwork in a way. That's part of it. Can I say one more thing to
Of
that, Lupi?
course. Oh my gosh, yes.
One way to realize for yourself that you're on the right track is how alive you feel when you're speaking about it, even just to your friends over a drink or something, and that sense of aliveness. And when that comes out of you and you sense it, please trust that it's more than just a feeling. It's something is moving. And so one way to really, for your vocation, from my perspective of knowing it, is what makes you feel most alive. But then that's the positive, but the negative side of that is what breaks your heart.
Mm,
And so if you're going around complaining about issue A and B, or there's always a problem, something else like that, what breaks your heart, that's a negative from your normal mindset, but it's also a beacon. And so that negative, which sounds not so exciting to talk about, But that place, actually, let's stop for a moment. And can I channel that? Can I flip that on its head? Can I find a solution to that problem?
Hmm.
Do you see?
So you're saying if there's something that you're talking about that comes alive, that's a sign. And if there's something that breaks your heart, like as in a problem that you see in the world,
Yes, yes.
that might be something that maybe we can't stop thinking about, or that just
Yeah.
is heartbreaking for us. That might
Yes,
be a
or
sign too.
irritates you or annoys you. My wife is a retired physical therapist and she created a niche creating concierge transport for elders. What she saw was that the irritation around physical therapists on this gap for elderly people between the
Mm,
services they can get from Medicare and the city versus what they really need. Do you
mm,
see? And so she saw that and it was disappointing. It's heartbreaking. It's irritating and annoying, all of these things.
mm,
And so she channeled that into her what she's found her calling in it. And so what breaks your heart is important because pay attention. You might not realize it, but you might be talking about something again, again, again. In actual fact, life is saying, hey, do you want to do something about it?
mm.
And so the negative can be turned into something also. And so we mustn't forget that these negative irritations are also teachers.
I love that you just said that they're also teachers. I really believe that people in our lives, even the people that are maybe negative in our lives, could be our teachers for ourselves.
Yes, very much so. I make the joke often to help people understand it. The people say, God, give me patience, not realizing that the answer to the prayer isn't patience, it's more opportunities to practice. Do you see? It's kind
Yeah.
of a joke, but that's how I think life and karma and these things work, is these negatives, we try to avoid them, but actually they come at us more and more. And
Mm.
so if you start to see that, if your heart aches for it or you're annoyed by it, this might sound strange, but I watched that movie some time ago about, it's called Founder. It's the McDonald's movie. You ever seen
Oh,
that?
I haven't
It's,
seen it.
I'm not sure if it's a particularly great movie, but there's a point where he's waiting for a hamburger in this drive-through in 1952 or something, whenever it was a long time ago, and it took forever. And he was so annoyed because he was a traveling salesman. Everywhere he went, it's like took forever to get the burger. It sounds silly, but in that moment of the negative, that's a teacher. I'm not saying McDonald's is good for your health, and I'm just joking. But the point is simply that how we pivot into things and how we see things that are irritating or hurt us, or we see sadness, that don't forget that beacon.
Mm,
That's the inverse of this dream that you have. And so both work, you see, from my book.
mm. Both are
Yeah.
important.
Yes, very much, very much.
Mm, mhm. I have a question around kind of the work you do. Is that something you can do virtually?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's quite funny in a way because it works over Zoom, which I think is quite a funny thing to say out loud. It doesn't matter where someone's located. It's based on a consciousness thing. So you could literally be on the moon. I don't think it would make a difference. If we can just get a signal, it works. So yes, that's as a straightforward answer. Yes, it works over Zoom, on phone calls, and everything else. And essentially, what I do is I basically just have someone's name, their
Mm,
permission. I say a little prayer to focus, and then my spirit guides speak. And again, they're speaking to a person about their life. And part of that, a big part is the soul, you see, wants to achieve its potential. It has a reason it
mm,
came, and the soul
mm,
is you. And so it's basically saying, hey, I look for this potential. I came to this life to learn the lesson of kindness or to
mm,
give back in some way. It wants to learn that. It's very much angled at how you're going to get there and what
mm,
blocks you. There's a great need for what are my blocks? How can we articulate that? And what we can do to unravel them.
mm.
And there's
Yeah.
much need for it.
Yeah. Well, and having that session with you was my last session before I left Miraval. And
Yeah,
I know you were doing energy work, which I'd done once before at Miraval.
yeah,
This might sound crazy to someone who's never experienced it. So very aware of that.
yeah,
And I have felt a shift in me
yeah. Oh,
after
you
our
have.
session.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. A lot of people say that and they even feel physically lighter, as in weight. There's less, like people actually say that as well. One of the things I'll say to folks who are brand new to this, who might be thinking this is a strange, strange occupation, is that the guidance that comes through is usually done with little or no prompting. And
Mhm,
then very quickly, usually within a minute or so, the person can validate what's given.
mhm.
So, for example, I tuned into a person recently and my guide said, never be late for a meeting again. And the person's stunned, their jaw drops, and like, I'm always late. And it wasn't done in a chastising way. It was speaking to that sense of like, okay, I can validate this to
Mm,
some degree. You see, it
mhm.
gives a little bit of confidence in what comes. So people say, "Are you ever get tested?" But every session is a test in a way.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. You told me right up front, you can record this session.
Yes, yes. In fact, if you can imagine, for many people, it's quite stunning in a way when this complete stranger it can tune into you and says something that's not just a basic stuff that Loopy is a nice person. We can all know that, and you have an amazing smile. We can all see that, but it might pick up something that's buried quite deep. So I'll say to someone who's very successful on the outside, you seem to carry a lot of insecurity. And they say, yes, I always have, and no one really knows it. And so something like that is quite shocking to the system. When you're in that place, you're a little bit stunned and someone's saying this and it's very deep and profound, you want to record it.
Yeah.
Because you forget, you see?
Yeah, I actually have listened to it several times.
Yeah.
And so I upload it. So I use a program for the podcast that transcribes the podcast. And I uploaded it so I would be able to reference it. Oh, what were the mantras or the affirmations that you shared with me? Because I found it so helpful and so valuable and so powerful. And I had that shock happen as you started talking. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah, there's layers to what comes out, and the words are precise. And so if you're not used to affirmations, these are it's almost like word medicine. I hate to say it, the word medicine, but metaphysical people in the early 20th century referred to it as a treatment where words and phrases could be used that are aligned with your deeper purpose, but also with the things you carry. If you carry a lot of fear, then it's not going to bypass your fear. We've got to speak to that. So you might stand bravely in yourself or something along that lines. One of the things that really is, I want to just say to people, if I may, is as a spiritual person, spiritual doesn't mean God per se, just a sense of connection to something bigger than yourself. And to me, vocation is spiritual all the way. And so that's why it's so important to find it, because it's tied to purpose.
Stephen, any last thoughts as you're thinking about this topic? Anything that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, one thing that just pops up immediately for me is doubt. And so doubt is regarded in some ways as a spiritual obstacle, sometimes like a spiritual sickness in a way, because you can have the greatest dream, but the doubt creeps in. And so doubt is very real in a way, but it's also very learned in a way, in that it might be that there was insecurity at home in the family unit. It might mean people talked down to you, or you were mortified one time in high school. It's all adds to it. It's that strength of sorts to push past the doubts, to overcome them. This is the battle inside every person, and we all are battling our demons in a way. And so if that's there and you talk yourself off again, I would say go explore the roots of your doubt and go explore things that happened. And that might be psychological therapy, there's EMDR, there's all kinds of modalities that can help you. But it's worth getting to the root of it and see if we can clear some of that. Because I find that just a little bit of clearing of some of it, all of a sudden now you see the path ahead. And it's a beautiful moment if you can do that, but it takes that sort of that determination, a little bit of courage to go into those dark spaces. And they again are teachers. And you realize, wow, I doubted myself because of this history of my past. And now I can see it, I can hear it, respect it, but I can say, we're going to be okay. And so don't forget that part.
Stephen, thank you so much for being here. How can people learn more about you? How can people work with you?
Yeah.
Tell us all the things.
Thank you for that plug. I appreciate it. I'm a terrible marketing person, so I say that with a smile. People say to me, I was searching for a medium in Austin. You didn't pop up. I'm like, oh, oops. So I have a website called spirituallivingschool.com, and I co-direct that with my dear friend. In there, you can find me for intuitive readings that you can do virtually. And also we have retreats we do a couple times a year. And the big project, if I can just plug it, is we plan to open the school in the fall of this year, where people can come and visit to do programs of self-discovery and healing, and like a spiritual school. That's in the Texas Hill Country. And so that's one of my side big projects. But if you just want to have a reading, you can look me up there and find the email and shoot me a message, and that can be done anywhere, anytime.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank
I'm going to take you up on that, by the way.
Anytime. Come see me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you so much having me on.